Everybody can see my screen. And I'm just gonna, Roger, I'll just turn it back to you to get us started.
Great, thank you, sir. And thank you everybody for coming on board this meeting. Our second working group meeting for the Shared Mobility as a Service, Mobility on Demand Intercommittee Working Group. This group and others have been set up by AASHTO to leverage the strength of our standing committees to address some issues in the cooperative automated transportation space. And MAS and MOD is a big part of what's in the cooperative automated transportation space. And we've been working on that for quite some time at WSDOT and also at the Council on Public Transportation. So I was glad to see this structure set up and this working group assembled. Brian Lagerberg, our Director of Public Transportation, and I are providing a modicum of leadership, mostly directed by staff, which is how we like it. But welcome, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Roger. I'm really looking forward to this. As Roger said, this is our second working group meeting. And we just recently completed a post-pandemic public transportation study in the state of Washington. And I think it's really important to note that the two leading recommendations coming out of that were maintaining equity, a focus on equity, and increasing access to public transportation, not decreasing access to public transportation. And I think the relationship between public transportation, shared mobility, MOS, MOD, all of that is potentially one of the opportunities that we have to increase public transportation and strengthen equity. But I think it has to be done in a way that where we put those as priorities and really work on identifying what the state's role is in supporting equity through mobility on demand, shared mobility. So I'm really excited about the working group. I'm really excited about this work because I think it's both really timely and really important for DOTs, but more importantly for our communities. So with that, Richard, I think unless you have something you want to add, we can move on to the roll call.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Richard,
Yes,
the only thing I would add is that the Senate just confirmed Secretary Pete. So it is a new world, and I think this MOS mod stuff may have a new stature in the transportation hierarchy.
And if you listen to his testimony while he was testifying before us, before the Senate, he seems to be an avid fan of complete streets. So that should be, I think, a very fun addition to the lexicon at DOT.
As the former director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, I'm really excited to see that happening. It is going to be interesting. There are a lot of down in the basement. I guess something's freezing over at DOT, but it'll,
Well, I'm just going to go down the list here. I'll start with Mr. Roger Millar.
Here.
All right. Mr. Brian Lagerberger.
I'm also here.
Mr. Matt Kenna.
Yeah, hi, good morning.
And if you could just say your name and who you're with,
Sure, yeah.
that'd be great.
Yeah, Matthew Kenna, also with WSDOT in public transportation as a planner. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Dan Courier.
Dan Courier here with Vermont Agency of Transportation.
Ms. Carrie Ruse. Carrie, you're muted. All right. She must have stepped away. Mr. Mark Sprick.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, Carrie Roos, Nebraska Public Transportation.
Great. Mr. Sprick.
Hi, Richard. It's Mark Sprick with Texas DOT.
Nope. Gene Roosman? Roisman. I keep forgetting it's Ruessman.
I say Rustman. I say
Rustman.
Gene Rustman, Michigan Department of Transportation, Office of Passenger Transportation.
Mr. Ken Buckeye.
Yes, good afternoon. Ken Buckeye with the Minnesota Department of Transportation.
Okay. Melissa Batula.
Hello, I'm with Pennsylvania DOT. I'm with the Highway Administration side, and I'm also representing the Council of Highway and Streets.
Fantastic. Kerry Wilcoxon.
Hi, everyone. This is Kerry Wilcoxon with Arizona Department of Transportation.
I see we also have staff. Great. Allie Loman.
Hi, Allie Lohman, AASHTO Safety and Mobility Division.
Mr. Shane Gill.
Shane Gill, Program Director for Multimodal Transportation.
Philip Burgoyne Allen.
Hi, I'm with AASHTO and representing the Council on Active Transportation.
Ooh, and I think I missed a member. Mike Boozleman.
Yes, Mike Bosleman, Montana. DOT. I'm the CIO and I'm acting deputy director for the time being. Sorry, I'm a little late.
Kelly Hardy.
Hi, yes, Kelly Hardy with AASHTO. I work on safety programs.
And my name is Richard Price, and I'm staff. I'm staff liaison. Oh, sorry.
Hey,
Brad
Richard.
Freeze. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. My name is Brad Freeze, work with the Tennessee Department of Transportation. I'm here representing the Committee on Transportation Systems Operations, CTSO.
Wonderful. Sorry about that. Very sorry. My screen is not that huge. I didn't see everybody. And again, my name is Richard Price. I'm staff liaison to AASHTO's Council on Public Transportation and its Multi-State Transit Technical Assistance Program. And I'm helping coordinate the working group. So welcome, everybody. And I'm going to turn this back over to Brian.
All right, thank you, Richard. Actually, I'm going to kind of hand it right back to you. I think we have a, do you have an update on the?
I figured, yeah, and I just hand it back to you just so you can kick it back to me, because it's that give and take that we like to have on our Zoom calls, because let's keep it interesting.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, exactly. It makes for a not so dull moment. So everyone, you can see the agenda on your screen, hopefully. So we just went through the roll call and now the update on AASHTO's shared mobility mod efforts. And I also even involved Mr. Freeze on this one because he's intimately involved with this effort. Just a quick update. I'm gonna title my update "Breaking Down Silos." I sort of looked at Roger for that. Roger's big on breaking down the silos. So you all should know that last month I was invited to a planning meeting of what is supposed to be a 3-day peer exchange on transportation systems management and operations and MOD. It is being hosted by AASHTO's National Operations Center for Excellence and ITS America's MOD Alliance. And I kind of got the invite to this planning committee. I actually didn't even know what the planning, they just said, hey, come to a planning session. I said, okay, I can do that. I didn't even know what it was for. I didn't have the agenda in front of me. But as it turns out, we're breaking down silos. Brad Freeze is involved, I think, with this group because it germinated from a partnership with the Committee on Transportation and Systems Operations, as well as with the ITS America, the MOD Alliance. And now we've been invited to participate in this 3-day peer exchange. And they finally sent me, it was really kind of hard to do the planning because it didn't really have the agenda because, really hard to plan when you don't know what's on the agenda or how you can help fill it. But this is the agenda. Can everybody see the NOCOE agenda? So this is the draft agenda. We're going to have another planning call this Friday to help fill in some of the speaker roles. But February 12th February 19th and February 25th are the dates. It's pretty much most of the morning and early afternoon. I'll scroll down so you all can see it. Oh, sorry, February 26th, my apologies, it's a Friday. Pretty much for the better of the day. They asked if we want to invite anybody to come and participate in this. You know, I wasn't going to be presumptuous and say, well, you can invite the entire working group, because I didn't think everybody would want the plethora of emails that would be expected to be forthcoming on that. So just let me know, keep me in, you know, send me a chat or send me an email. Let me know if you're interested in participating in some, all, or none of this peer exchange, but I thought it was something that was worthy of an update to the group. Thank you, Roger, for your involvement in this group. And so now we're breaking down silos. So they're thinking about us, you know, so that's the whole purpose of this working group, is to, you know, help break down silos and get us talking amongst committees. So that's pretty much the only update I have. And I wanted to share that with the group.
Hey, Richard, could you send that back?
I'm sorry?
Could you send that out to us?
Yes, I will do so after this meeting.
Great, thank you.
And now, let me, Brian, so you don't have to kick it back to me, because King was supposed to be on this call, been participating in the meeting, but I think he's held up in a meeting with FHWA. I said he might be 30 some odd minutes late. I see that this presentation will take a lot less time than the 30 and then the 5, you know, it won't take more than 5 minutes. So we just wanted to give everybody, all the members, just a quick review of basically what the member roles and responsibilities and deliverables of the group are. So just, you know, quickly, the purpose of the objectives, you know, again, to provide timely information to CEOs on emerging areas, in our case, shared mobility, MOS, MOP. Also to clarify issues and options for state DOTs in these areas, and basically to facilitate timely engagement, both within your committee, your respective committees, as well as to hear perspectives from your state DOTs on this issue. Now, what's the roles and responsibilities? Well, first, you know that there's going to be periodic conference calls. You know, I'm going to call them Zoom conference calls. They're really Zoom meetings. And then we're going to need your help in developing and vetting informational documents. We'll get into that later. More importantly, we're looking to the members to be, I guess, champions of our efforts. Present work products of the working group to your committees, to your councils, champion our activities and the work products within the committees and councils, as well as not just be the informer, but be the informee. And you need to keep us aware of what other councils and other committees are saying, and we'd like their feedback. That's really kind of the important way. This is going to be a two-way street. And then last but not least, keep your home state informed. You know, keep the members, the staff at the state DOT informed about what we're doing, as well as, again, bring us back feedback so we can learn from them. Now, what are our deliverables? Well, in the near term, and again, we'll hear more of this later, we're going to be developing an overview for CEOs, what we're referring to as a CEO one-pager. Eventually, we're going to start working on a working group website. Currently, right now, our website is housed within the Council on Public Transportation's website, ptc.transportation.org. You can find our website there. And then over the long term, we're hoping to you'll all engage on issues and policies and help us develop policy position papers. Now, speaking of the CEO one-pager, this is a recent draft of the drones one-pager, and it differs. I think I told the group last time that I was basing our draft outline on the UAS one-pager, but they've gone and they've taken it, you know, it's an emerging area. So, right, technology changes quick. So does this one-pager. I changed faster than I could get to it, but these are kind of the areas they want us to cover or think about in terms of developing our one-pager. Yeah, you'll see state DOT operations. That was a new one that was added to their one-pager. What the current state DOT roles. This is what page 2 might look like. And then what's currently happening. Again, I'm not going to. I will say that the one pager we've distributed to everybody, the outline sort of gets at a lot of these points. Key issues to watch. And what are the activities happening right now? And of course, staff contacts. Other than that, I will end that part and go back to the agenda and then turn it back to Brian to go into it. So that's the story with what the one pager, an example of a one pager. So as we go and we talk about what we see in the future for our one pager, that's sort of a good start. Now I have a copy of it up here in case anybody wants to refer to it, just say, hey, can we look at the drones one pager? And it's right here. I'll turn it back to Brian.
All right, thank you, Richard. Do you have the your initial draft of our one pager?
Yep.
There it is, right there. All right. So I think
it's nothing. Sorry, it's nothing fancy. Sorry.
Doesn't look anything like the drone one.
No, it doesn't.
So I think at this point, I'd like to entertain a conversation around this. And I'm not sure if you all had a chance to look at it. Maybe you could just quickly go through it, Richard, so that we all see what's included.
Well, I thought we would start with some question about a good definition of what is shared mobility, mobility as a service, and mobility on demand. I know that's a big question to ask for a one pager, but I think that was based on the prior version of what I had seen in terms of that this opening up with the definition would be a good way to start. Then going into what is the state DOT's role, possibly even going to operations perspective. What are the benefits, challenges, and trends? I populated the key questions and issues with the discussion we had from our prior meeting. And then based, of course, information on our prior meeting, who are our partners and our allies, both from the government agencies perspective and the nonprofits perspective. What's happening at AASHTO, what has been our role? And then how can state DOTs be involved, or how can they help? And then, of course, our key contacts. But other than that, this is a good way to start the conversation.
So let's start by just asking if people see that we're missing anything. Would you like to see additional items on there? I think our next two items were actually agenda items. We're going to talk about what is shared mobility and then what the state role should be. So kind of two topics within that document.
Right. Brian, this is Ken Buckeye. With regard to those key questions, something that occurs to me, and maybe it's covered under one of the other committees, but keeps coming up as a significant issue here in Minnesota, and that is curb space management. There's a lot of competition for curb space, and particularly when you're talking about shared mobility, TNCs, even drones, parking, delivery, all of those things make curb space management more complicated these days than ever. So that would be my suggestion as possibly something that could be added to those key questions.
I like that. I think that actually was a topic that came up briefly last meeting.
That's a good point, and it I think it's included in management, but pricing is a big part of that. A lot of cities generate a lot of revenue with paid on-street parking, and with this MOS in the some people's future worlds, there is no parking because the cars are always moving. And where I was in a meeting with a bunch of, I thought, pretty tech savvy business people in Seattle, and we started talking about pricing curb access, and they went bonkers. I said, well, wait a minute, you pay to park your car. And so yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation. Richard, I think overall, something that might help with this one pager is just, who is the working group, what committees are represented, so that I, as a CEO, know that, okay, this was developed by boom, boom, boom. You see the cross-pollination between the various standing committees. That would be helpful.
Richard, this is Dan Courier. I just wanted to share two thoughts. One is, do we want to include an objective, as was kind of included in the drone, and whether that's below the definition? And then two, my manager, Ross McDonald, and I were talking about this, and right off we asked the question, I know the audience is, DOT and what the role in CEOs, but should we be more specific when we talk about the benefits, right? There's many audiences that benefit. There are many challenges, and do we need to put those into different, silos, so to speak, or groups inside of this one pager?
Well, let me go back to the CEO one pager that we have from drones and see, and this is just page one. Let me flip over to page two, see if there's anything you envision wanting to include in ours. And just in terms of overall topics, we can get into details afterwards.
Richard, can you put the list of issues back up?
You mean our one pager, you mean, Brian? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Let me make it bigger too, so people are struggling to see.
I think maybe it's embedded within that, but you had us read the article about the relationship between Uber and Lyft and public transportation, whether in what situations would you anticipate Uber actually taking ridership away from transit? So just the risks of the overall system and increasing trips on the system.
I'm sorry, Brian, was that a question you were asking of me? My apologies.
Well, no, it's more just the whole question about whether MOS mod is going to contribute to more efficiency of the system, or whether it's actually going to create more risks for the system, the entire transportation system. Which I think is one of the key issues that we ought to be thinking about and looking at ways to mitigate that risk.
What do the others think?
Richard, this is Brad. I guess maybe does that fit into operations? Just as one of the key issues, operations. I don't see that covered by one of the issues.
Actually, no, it wasn't covered at all. So operations would be something that everyone would, I think, that should be added to this outline.
Yeah, I would support that, and maybe it does fit within operations.
Yeah, this is Melissa. I kind of had a similar vein. I've been really struggling with the conflicting movements that are going to be caused or could potentially be caused. So how do you manage that? You know, it's going to be a change in how traffic moves, but it's also going to affect the pedestrian traffic on the sidewalks. When you look at, like, say, those rideshare locations at the curb or whatever that's going to be. So I think that does kind of fit within the operations realm too.
Yeah, a big part of this in my mind has been, back to the notion of cooperative automated transportation is the extent to which the various players in the MOS space complement each other as opposed to competing with each other. I've been really concerned here in Washington State that the TNCs are going to impact our choice riders and impact revenue at the agencies, at the public transportation agencies, and leave public transportation, back in kind of a social service role. The way I describe it when I'm talking with the community about it is, I don't want someone taking an Uber or a Lyft from their office at Microsoft all the way across town to South Lake Union to go visit Amazon. I want to see them take Uber and Lyft to go down to the light rail station and take light rail over to go see, so that that public-private partnership and making that work is going to be really key to this, and it links in with labor issues. It links in with we've got ADA on here, but we really don't have how do we integrate this with transit agencies' paratransit obligations? Can a transit agency meet its paratransit obligations by using MOS? And what, can we avail ourselves of the cost savings? Another thing that's not on the list is the extent to which the public sector could invest in or subsidize private, MOS as a part of a public transportation program. We've been doing some stuff with the FTA MOD sandbox. A couple of transit agencies in Washington, and I know transit agencies around the country, have been contracting with VIA or contracting with Lyft to provide that first mile, last mile connection. Can we use the federal funding that comes to the states to essentially subsidize that that operation going forward? What would the requirements be around that?
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Roger's saying, and I think it is a matter of determining the appropriate state role in things like MOS and MOD, and should there be a state role to the extent that it would help level that playing field and ensure equity across a platform like that. Because when you're talking about, what if the TNC took over as your main source of transportation across a city, well, that leaves out everyone who can't afford it. Mm-hmm. and it will negatively impact the availability of public transit. So I think we really need to spend time determining the appropriate role for a state DOT or a state agency of whatever type that is, but someone who doesn't have a profit to be made off from it.
Yeah, Gene's absolutely right, and it depends on whether you're a home rule state or a Dillon rule state. Here In Washington, we're a Dillon rule state, and local government can't do anything that our state legislature doesn't enable them to do. So the TNCs and others will often come to the state legislature to preempt local control. And our job as a state agency is to be subject matter experts and advocates for what is the proper public policy direction to go in this space, which is really complicated.
And I think a huge effort has to be put into educating state legislators, because Uber and Lyft are also very adept at talking a very convincing game of why there should be state regulation, even if it's really not to the benefit of locals. So it's a huge amount of education, not just for the DOTs, but for how do we educate legislators effectively, especially in states like ours where there's term limits.
Yeah. I know that was a huge thing in California with the mobility data specification, and they're working around the country trying to inoculate themselves at state legislatures against cities and transit agencies requiring them to share data.
Yeah.
This is Ken Buckeye again. In looking over the list, I just raised this point. It may be covered under data or connectivity, but what we're trying to do in some of our experiments here in Minnesota is create a digital platform that more smoothly integrates the various modes, and you know, the notion of e-wallets with those digital platforms and the partnerships that are necessary in order to develop those are something we shouldn't forget. You know, maybe they're under data or maybe under connectivity, but the digital platform and the kind of seamlessness of creating, you know, a tool that allows people in transit to move easily from one mode to the other is going to be an important dimension to supporting MOS and MOD.
So to me, I felt like that was under data because I had the same thought, Ken, but under data where it says standards means to me that covers it, but maybe we need to be more explicit that it's open source data. I mean, we can't move forward with this without requiring open source data platforms.
Right. Just didn't want to forget it.
And this maybe is tied to what you were talking about, Gene. We do a lot of grant programs, and typically our grants are public sector focused. And the question that I have is, you know, if we're going to support the integration of public and private, what do we have to change? What are the barriers to actually making that change in approach and philosophy?
Right, and I think we can play a big role in that. I mean, we've really started encouraging public-private partnerships even when they come to us for a grant proposal. So it's public transit agencies partnering with private entities and then sponsoring different things that help tech firms, whatever, understand the public sector and meet some of the people in the public sector and understand that we want to be solution-based, not just we're going to show off your technologies just because it's a new technology. But if they want funding from us, it has to solve a problem.
And I don't know about you, but where we're struggling right now is with our intercity bus program, which is a private. We purchase service, and so we're purchasing it from private vendors. And during the pandemic, when ridership has dropped, and they relied on part of the revenue coming from the riders, how do we respond? Is it our job to keep them afloat? as a private company. And
Yeah.
to answer that, if we're talking about a public service.
We struggled with that too, but we had already kind of set a precedent in other areas of our state that had been abandoned by the private sector, and we put state and federal money into keeping that going. And we felt the same way when we got CARES Act funding, that our goal is to provide that transportation network across our state and connection to the national network, and what's the means to that end. So instead of thinking, oh, I'm giving money to a private company, it's I'm giving money for the use of our public citizens to get where they need to be in this state. But I will also say we put some hefty requirements around the use of those funds, and demanded that they share financial information with us to receive those funds. So I think they have to go hand in hand, the regulation with the benefit.
All right, I think there's a couple people we haven't heard from yet. Any other ideas? Issues that we need to be thinking about, addressing?
Topics missing from the one pager, things that overall broad topics that we need to include, that would be a great start. Now, go right back to the draft.
How about just as throwing out an idea? I know we've talked through legislation quite a few times, maybe resources for model legislation for where it has been implemented, perhaps successfully. So just ways to get to those resources. Kind of how do we combine those or collect them, if you will, and then perhaps send the CEOs to, hey, this is what's working here.
No, I think that's an important one, Melissa. And one of the things that we ran into when we started talking about this in our TDM executive forum is the traditional recipients of our grants are not at all interested in letting more people in on those grant programs. They don't want to see MOS and MOD be eligible for our mobility grants because they're just thinking it's the same size pie, they're just going to get a smaller slice. So when we look at federal money, is it a separate program or is it eligibility within existing programs? And then what do each of us do at the state level if we've got state funding in the game to make room for MOD and MOS without having that negatively impact our more traditional grant recipients?
Well, and I think in terms of the coordination, we managed 16 grant programs within public transportation at WashDOT. And if we keep on adding grant programs that are specific to a single thing, we're creating more and more silos. We're creating more and more barriers to integration and coordination and service. So I think being able to identify strategies to broaden the scope, broaden the potential partners, I think is really important.
Yeah.
The other thing I can think of, Richard, and I don't know if it fits in here, but just making sure that we aren't creating something that's already been created. So, the first item on there is what's a definition, of shared mobility, mobility as service, mobility on demand. SAE is already working on a taxonomy for that to be considered a standard. I think we should utilize that. If there's other things in here that another authoritative body, someone that's looked on as a leader in that area has already come up with an answer to this, let's seriously consider using their answer, not creating a new one.
With a particular attention to our friends at the U.S. Department of Transportation.
Yes, absolutely. And NHTSA, some of these things will touch on things that may come out of there, right? So I think there's a lot of places we need to look and make sure we're not recreating the wheel.
No, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I love plagiarism. I know how to cite things, so I'm not worried about that. So,
Richard, the labor issue is bigger than living wage issues for TNC operators. It's also displacement in the public transportation community. We are, again, we have our TDM executive forum and we've got labor at the table and they are watching very closely. It's one thing that Uber and Lyft drivers don't get paid a living wage. It's another thing that their Teamsters or their ATU drivers are driving the paratransit buses. And if Uber and Lyft or Via or somebody else starts taking that paratransit role, there are jobs, union jobs that might be at risk. And that concerns them greatly. So we've got that labor issue. And the other thing that we need to start thinking about, and it relates to the new AASHTO strategic plan, is non-traditional partners. I have had forever a quarterly meeting with our AGC here in Washington State. We've had meetings on and off with labor. I just set up a quarterly meeting with labor. Just to make sure that they feel that they're included in these conversations. So when we have coordination and we list cities and counties and the rest, we might want to put organized labor on that list.
And I wonder if a better term than just labor is workforce implications, because there's lots of different workforce implications, and it leads to the need for new education programs and transitioning to different careers and all of that.
One thing I want to mention on the workforce piece is just that, there's kind of the two pieces of the workforce, or one is like the users of these services will be able to access more opportunities for workforce opportunities, but then also the existing workforce of the transportation industry. So I feel like there's kind of two differing pieces of the labor question.
Totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Is that last, I'm sorry, but is that last bullet transportation pricing or transportation funding?
Pricing.
Could be both.
This is just a summary of all the discussion we had from our previous meeting in terms of all the issues that were discussed.
Okay.
What I was trying to say while I was on mute there, Richard, was I was asking you how you're feeling about the list and whether you feel you're getting enough to prepare a draft for us.
In terms of the overall categories, I think we've got a really good start based on this conversation and prior conversations. Again, this is a two-way street. This doesn't have to end the conversation. If you think of something tomorrow that we may have missed, please feel free to send me an email and I'll work with. And we're going to work, Ali and I and King. By the way, King G has joined us. There, he was running behind on a prior meeting. But we're going to put together a one-pager, or at least a draft for consideration for the next time we meet. So this way, everybody will have something to respond to. And that's our goal. And our actual goal, then beyond that, thinking we'd like to get it approved and to build and to submit it to the board of directors, King, if I'm correct, in the actual spring meeting.
Right. That's the target.
That's the target.
Richard, a couple of other nonprofits, I don't know that they're necessarily allies, but they need to be taken into consideration. We don't have APTA on this list.
True.
And we don't have the New Urban Mobility Alliance on this list.
And I think if you're going to list APTA, CTAA should probably be included.
NACTO might also have a role.
Yeah.
Roger, who runs the Urban Mobility Alliance? That sounds familiar.
Oh goodness, I just had it up here. Let me get it back. Harriet Tregoning.
Okay, Harriet, yes.
Yeah, and Harriet's, they are well funded by the foundation space and have a very talented team going over there. And they have a very different worldview.
Yep. Sorry. Right, should we move on to the agenda?
Sorry, but is TRB an entity that we might want to, I don't know if they fit in here or not, but.
Well, I think TRB is definitely an entity. They have all sorts of standing committees, and just be curious as to which one we should put there. They have so many standing committees.
Yeah, I would think in the, I don't know, we can maybe talk offline. There's a few I can think of. And I think there's some specifically dealing with, I mean, AP020 is one I co-chair, and it's, we just changed our name, so I'm gonna have trouble remembering the name, but emerging, it's basically innovation and new technology related to mobility. And we do focus on passenger side of things. So transit more, but, and I think there may be a one or two others. So I can try and help you with that if I.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And they certainly drive TCRP projects.
So unless we have more topics, maybe we should move on to the next agenda item, Richard.
Absolutely.
And I heard Gene's point, which I think we agreed with, which is let's find a established definition, maybe from USDOT on this space. But I wonder if we should quickly go through and just talk from our perspectives on what those four different categories. The complexities we're facing, the benefits that potentially could have, challenges and trends.
So Brian, you want to just brainstorm across all four? You want to take one at a time?
No, let's just brainstorm all four, because I think people will think about them as they think of them. And maybe we talked about this a little bit in the issues. I think the funding complexity, public versus private, we have a tendency to fund public and not so much the private. And yet, I think if we're looking at integration, we have to figure out how we can do both effectively.
Brian, I agree about funding. And I think underneath that category of complexities of funding, is this notion of partnerships as well. How do you make sense of the partnerships? How much do DOTs support? Often, and the reason I raise this is because some of the shared mobility concepts we're considering here in Minnesota, particularly in smaller communities, they couldn't stand alone, and our supporting government bodies, providers aren't interested in doing it. So it creates complexity in how you arrange these partnerships, and also how much support, which may be necessary for them to survive, how much government support you, and how do you think about that in terms of fairness and equity? So there's a lot of complexity to go around.
Well, and just to build off of that, and we did a project some years ago on the 520 bridge across Lake Washington from Seattle, and it was a shared mobility project. And because the state was involved, that made it dramatically more complex, and ultimately killed the project because of the steps that we had to go through as a state, as a partner in that process. It's the legal questions, the risk and liability issues, that we were held to a higher standard than our private partner would have been held to on their own.
That's interesting. That's one sort of mega project extreme, you might say. And where my mind is at right now is sort of the micro project. How do you support scooters and bike share in small towns? But equally, they're problematic.
Yeah.
So you might have touched on this earlier in a session I missed, but I think one of the challenges in this space is that these concepts are seen as urban solutions. Mm-hmm. And I think there are very much rural needs that can be served. And so going back to somebody's thought earlier about partnerships, but I think the challenge is to overcome the notion that these are urban solutions.
And to that point, I was going to bring up that, we have to think of this not just from the urban perspective, right? That we've got to look at, there are probably differing roles for DOTs in the urban area versus the rural area, because they can't stand up on themselves in the rural area. So how do we help that happen? And is that, some things that we've been looking at are having transits basically run their own TNC type service. Uber and Lyft aren't really interested in coming there, but can we use that same model, and public transit can be the ones that are actually acting as that TNC. So I think the state has to play a different role and consider differences between the urban and rural needs.
I think another partnership here is, you guys should know this better than I do. I'm from the infrastructure side. Although I have to tell you, as a master's student, I actually worked on a project that looked at paratransit and scheduling on-demand paratransit. But anyway, HHS, rides for medical appointments. There might be some funding pot for that function. I don't know, is that still there? Health and Human Services funding?
I don't know.
It is, but it doesn't go through the state DOTs.
Right. We do partner with that on a state level and encourage partnerships on a local level to get funding to use for transit. In some areas it works well, in some areas it doesn't, because there's not a standard message necessarily from the very top. I think we find the same thing with veterans transportation. That is a very complicated, confusing beast in itself, and more guidance from the federal level at the very best would mean more service for everyone using those funds that are available.
Those are good points. And I think the ability to repurpose some of the technology that's out there. Right now there are a lot of people that are very interested in rideshare matching software. There are a number of large companies that have employed it as a part of their commuter production program. And I've been thinking about it, frankly, for our agency, because we move up and down I-5 between Olympia and Seattle all the time. And a lot of us do it all by ourselves. And you could have a system to line up drivers with passengers, but taking some of these, Agile Mile and Trip Spark and stuff like that and repurposing it for rural mobility on demand, so that, entire communities were signed up and had the ability to match someone who happens to be driving somewhere with somebody who needs a ride.
Roger, that's a good and interesting point, and it raises the question of about the long-term problems we're going to encounter with the COVID phenomenon, and how we're going to change our habits, how we're going to change our commuting trends. A lot of complicated issues there that we don't know, of course, but raises a lot of questions.
It does. You have to worry about whether that stranger jumping in your car could kill you. It's always been an issue, but it's a little different now. It could be a friend jumping into the car.
One of the things I think we're talking about is shared mobility, MOS and MOD, tinkering around the edges, or is it a fundamental change? And I think, Roger, you alluded to that when we've had the transits kind of push back on our efforts to broaden who we can partner with and fund, where they've said, no, it's a fixed pot, don't take our funding away from us. We see that within our van pool program, where we at the state are trying to broaden who we can partner with, and the transits are pushing back and saying, no, that's our money. I think that's indicative of a broader change in the overall system, as opposed to just small marginal changes around the edges, which is certainly going to both affect the complexities we have to deal with, the challenges, and potentially the benefits.
And I do think you've got to determine the correct philosophy that your state's going to take toward it. Is it we're mandating this, or are we incentivizing it? Are we incentivizing the locals to partner with and become involved with MOS and MOD type operations and initiatives? Are we making it easier, or are we saying, no, you must do this and we're going to use your funding to do it? So I think that, departments do have to decide what their philosophy is going to be and what their approach is going to be to that. And if we can provide some guidance or best practices or promising practices, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think you got a good point. And we also need to be able to leverage the risk and the reward and put them side by side. Now, the risk is you're letting these folks into my funding stream. Oh my goodness, the reward is maybe you don't have to fund that big losing paratransit program you have that's hugely expensive. Then maybe they get a little bit of your funding, but they take a huge load off. That could be a net plus to a public transportation agency.
This is Dan. I'd like to throw in, just along this discussion, Vermont, we have a strong partnership with our transit providers through the Go Vermont program, leveraging Agile Miles platform for trip planning. And, we always like to start a conversation with, hey, let's not just start the bus route, right? Let's just not go buy the software. Let's start a carpool, right? Let's start a van pool. And if those two are successful, what can we do next? And so there's always a growth, and I bring the transit providers into every call, right? Because those bus routes are as successful in Vermont because, people are willing to take, and do a carpool, go and try a van pool, but take public transit as well as the many modes, throughout Vermont. And so I think that's one of the real benefits that we're seeing, through the software. And so, building mobility management, is one thing that we constantly talk about. How can we improve someone's knowledge and then turn it around so it improves their mobility at the same time? And so that's one thing that I just want to share here.
I think the other thing to address in here is how do we become better partners with the, highways and transit? What are the benefits? And we really need to look at that. I mean, because there's, especially in this space, there's a lot that benefit both, right? The more connected our roadways are, the more effective MOS and MOD can be, right? The more options you can give people and the safer you make it. And so we really need to push that one DOT, I'll take from our own department, that whatever side of the department you're on, or in some cases you're in different departments dealing with transit and dealing with roads, but you need to have that common theme and that common understanding of what the benefits are for both sides of the program.
One thing I wanted to flag, this is Philip from Ashto, is just another consideration in this is on the education side of things and student mobility. Just because carpooling is already something that's happening informally in the education space, and with transporting youth, there's obviously a whole different set of concerns that come along with that. But also, states are required to provide transportation for certain groups of kids, homeless students, students with special needs, and then you also have low-income students who might lack access to transportation. So I feel like that's another piece of this that would be, something that will grow in the future is student mobility.
Hey, and Carrie, if I could call you out for a second. I noticed that in your survey response, part of the first meeting, you indicated that you're not doing any of this. I'm kind of curious where you are in this conversation and what you see as the complexities and benefits that you may have in Nebraska.
No, we're not. We're just exploring some of these possibilities as we're focusing on one region of the state. And so that's this for me. This is really a learning curve to learn what other states are doing and proposing. But it really, when the other gentleman was talking about the rural areas, I mean, Nebraska isn't just rural; it's frontier. And so I have a question about whether or not this is really feasible in the very rural parts of the state. So those are just my thoughts.
You should come out to Stehekin, Washington and see how it works.
I'd love to.
That's rural. You can't even drive to Stehekin. You have to take a boat or fly in.
I'm still intrigued by the difference between rural and frontier.
Well, frontier means that there's basically nothing much west of Lincoln in Nebraska. A frontier is, you know, the diminishing populations in our rural counties is really astonishing.
Are there pockets, or is it truly just really widespread and they have to travel a distance to get to any of their services? And
it's very widespread. I mean, Lincoln and Omaha, of course, are the two largest metropolitan areas, and they're in the eastern part of the state. So when you're in the panhandle in Nebraska, you're very far. Well, you oftentimes have to cross state lines to get basic services. So. Not that this isn't applicable to Nebraska. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm here. We are always want to explore new opportunities and new ideas.
Hey, I just wanted to recognize Abigail Jackson just arrived. No, she just popped in. She's representing Jeannie Ward Waller of Caltrans, who's the Deputy Director for Planning and Modal Programs, and representing the Council on Active Transportation. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Sorry I'm late. We do have some opinions on some of these things, so happy to participate in the discussion.
Well, since you decided to mention that, how about it? What are complexities and benefits?
Okay.
Since you suggested.
Well, so we are working on something like an integrated payment system in when considering like mobility as a service. And I think one of the challenges or complexities is like a lot of transit agencies have mobility as a service, but it's like still a closed loop system. So people have their like transit dollars each month. And we want to open that up into more of an open loop payment system, so you can tap to pay anywhere with your conventional credit card, and you can still have like a cap on what you spend, but it's not basically limited to, like, you're not having to buy transit dollars basically. So that's one complexity we're working on. We don't want people to have to convert their money into transit. And I think one of the benefits of something like that, and you can stop me if you've already discussed some of this, but we're also looking into, like, it can be very cumbersome we have 300 some transit agencies in California, so we're pretty fragmented, and people will have to sign up for like special discounts at all these different agencies. It's just really difficult. So we want to streamline that down with our integrated payment system. So they only have to register once. It's more secure that way, and they can get a discount across agencies. And then I guess when we're talking about shared mobility on demand, that is something we're supportive, but like as a complement to transit. So we're supportive of carpool, Lyft, or, you know, not just TNCs in general, but like the pooled version of them. So and then using those systems to get to and from transit stations. We're supportive of putting incentives in place to incentivize people to use like the bicycle and ped and transit infrastructure basically you can get in between those transit stations. So we want to support pooling and shared mobility, but with a strong connection to existing transit infrastructure. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think it actually is kind of pushing us into the next agenda item, which is state DOT's role in shared mobility, MOD. And Richard, I think you can tease out quite a bit from our earlier conversations what some different perspectives are on that, but maybe we should just open it up and see if we're missing something, if there's something that your state is particularly interested in support or regulating the services.
Richard and Brian, this is Brad Freeze from TDOT. I guess before moving on, one of the benefits, thinking about it in terms of day-to-day traffic operations on the network, and using each of the TNCs have their own dynamic routing system, obviously that they use, and same thing with better cooperation and integration of transit services into day-to-day operations. I think there's huge opportunity there. When you talk about special events and major traffic generating incidents, in just better coordination and making the system more reliable.
Can I just add a role for the perspective for DOTs for us to consider? One thing that we find a lot in Vermont is we end up assessing a lot of the approaches that our providers are suggesting and then helping them to unify that into a single solution. And so I would hope that was something to work into here.
And I think I've said this already, but to me, a role is assessing where there are inequities from the natural system, from letting things happen as they will in the, free market, and filling those gaps. I think it's also providing a platform that allows that. So, that's our thought behind getting a statewide MOS that MDOT will procure and support, and hopefully find other sources of support later, but that everybody has access to that platform and that basic information at least, and then can build on it as their areas, as it makes sense for their areas and as areas can afford to do that.
We've put a lot of energy in our state's role as a convener and an educator in this space. There are transit agencies that are moving ahead. There are transit agencies that aren't, and there are city councils, county, whatever, and what we're trying to do is level the playing field a little bit and make sure that everybody sees and hopefully understands the opportunity and the challenges around MOS and MOD and shared mobility. It's been interesting. We've had the scooter wars, where they're illegal in Seattle and embraced in Spokane, and we see a lot of variation around the state. One of the things we're trying to do, although one size doesn't fit all, and there should be some local flavor certainly and some local control over these things, we want to make sure that everyone in Washington at least understands that this may be an opportunity for them. And so we're convening, discussing, educating the agencies that would participate and the decision makers.
I agree, Roger. So we're actually going to be hiring a consultant to put together a technology strategic plan for the state, and part of that will be assessing the readiness of rural areas to take on technology and advising what steps the state could take to help increase their readiness, their ability to actually use the technology that's out there.
I'd say we also have a role, this is Melissa from Pennsylvania, we also have a role in balancing the safety concerns of different modes, and that comes back to Roger in the education piece. I know when we had the personal delivery devices, they came and lobbied, and we were somewhat successful at getting a framework in place that we think could kind of keep everybody safe. Not 100% successful, but again, you almost have to help in that education role to help frame it in a way that's going to make it successful and not just lopsided. I'll say one side that benefits, say, the private side. So it's that balance.
In Minnesota, we've taken on the role of trying to be more flexible with technology budgets, and specifically allowing our technology budget to be used to incentivize the development of those partnerships and the technology that's being tested and developed. So I can't tell you how much we've been able to provide in that area, but it's not insignificant.
I think the state DOT in California, what we want to do is, I mean, we're really focused on climate change here. So any opportunity to help people get rid of their cars and access low carbon modes, that's a big focus for us.
Someone's at the door just a second.
All the beauty of working from home.
Big fun. Another thing that we're doing, and a thing that we need to do, just in terms of states' roles, one thing that we're doing is we're looking at our state's public disclosure records law in the context of MOD and MOS data. You think about the mobility data specification, or all the various combinations and permutations, and a lot of private providers are very reluctant to share anything with me, because anything you share with me, anyone on the planet can request, and they have a right to it. And so we're working through that. A place that we need to be in that we're not is procurement reform, because our procurement laws are really good at buying asphalt and toilet paper and pencils, but really cumbersome in terms of buying services and buying technologies. We have procurement processes that take longer than the life cycle of some of the technologies that we procure. Our tolling back office, we've been at that for almost 5 years now, replacing the back office of our tolling system, and we have 6 months to go, and it's ridiculous. So I know I have been beating that drum in a bunch of places at AASHTO, but in the MOD MOS space, how we procure and the contracts between the public and the private sector are going to be an issue that we're going to need to take a lead on. Haven't done anything on it yet, but I'll throw it out there.
This is Dan from Vermont. I just want to say we ended up going with one of our local providers to help us contract with VIA for one of our on-demand micro transit pilots, right? So it's just easier to deal with than to go through the IT procurement. So yes, yeah. Roger, that's so true.
And that DOTs really, and all of state government, has to learn to be more nimble and get rid of some of their antiquated, because some of them are antiquated rules that aren't based on current technology. I mean, and just even the procurement process and the contracting process, we've been trying to chip away at that at MDOT, because it's not conducive to the speed at which technology changes and the complications with data governance and such. And I think DOTs really have to step up their game if they want to be in the game. and we started an enterprise information management unit section to help us deal with some of those issues. And so it is going to be a matter of building different staffs and reimagining and rethinking, who do you have on staff? What types of positions do you need at your DOT to be able to deal in this realm?
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that, Jean. We're trying to just create even new classifications for data scientists here in California. That classification never existed. It doesn't have a union for a home. So that's like the first step we need to work on, I think. And then also, I think someone else brought up data sharing, and with to be more responsive to mobility needs, we need better data. And I think like some of our tolling agreements, we don't have good data sharing clauses in there. I think building up some of that language would be helpful.
All right, I think we're almost out of time. Are there any last minute ideas?
Well, I don't think I think we did a lot of talking about what the state DOT's role in terms of shared mobility, awesome mod from the DOT perspective. What about from your AASHTO? And we have representatives here from all AASHTO committees, and I'd love to hear that perspective.
I would love to have AASHTO staff solve all of my problems.
That's it, done. Let's end this call now. Boom.
Well, I think just like our role at the state, one of AASHTO's role is convening and educating, and maybe even driving some of the reform efforts. I'd hate to see us have to do procurement reform 52 different times. The definitions are important. Finding best practices, if something's happening in California or Minnesota or Washington, how do we make that happen? When is it appropriate in Nebraska or Wyoming? I think that's certainly a role we play.
And that's certainly what was envisioned for the website that I think Richard went over again earlier in the meeting, that we would have a place where these best practices, these model provisions can be a place that people can find it.
I think another of the things that, again, the value of this working group that kind of cross-pollinates the different standing committees is the cooperative part of this. It is cooperative automated transportation. So it's not a CTSO issue. It's not a public transportation issue. It's not a committee on highways and streets. It's all of our issue. And, in my role as the CEO, I need to balance that. And I'm hoping that AASHTO can help serve as a place where we have those conversations and make the different modes that we are stewards of cooperative instead of competitive.
So from the committee's perspective, for everybody who's represented here from the other councils, the other committees, are there conversations that are occurring about awesome mod and shared mobility? If so, what is happening? What's coming out of those conversations?
I guess Richard mentioned at the top, as far as the National Operations Center of Excellence in the peer exchange workshop taking place over the next 3 weeks, really talking about the operations side the TISMO side, how it can be leveraged and how it can be, what the role is on that operational side and specific to day-to-day operations.
Any takers, anyone?
No, Richard, but I'll take the easy way out and I'll say the one area we obviously have to take a look at AASHTO committees, what publications do we have or policies that we need to figure out how to integrate some of what we're seeing through the shared, whether it be the service on demand or how do we incorporate that into design? So we talked about curb space. So how do we incorporate that into how we're approaching projects moving forward, those type of things.
Great.
All right, Richard, I think we're now pretty much out of time. So let me just say, I think we agreed the last time that we would meet quarterly. So we'll continue that schedule. I think Richard promised us that he would have a draft of the one pager prior to the next meeting, or at least at the next meeting.
I think our aim is going to be in the April timeframe, for the next working group meeting. This way we can have some time to put together this one pager. There to be consideration of it and discussion on this next during this next meeting, and then as King had said, that we're going to look to have it and then we'll do things something like I think email approval. We'll do some revisions and send it around for email approval. This way we can have it ready in time for our AASHTO spring meeting, where it's going to go before the board, and then I assume essentially been distributed among the CEOs.
All right, so if
I
you
think
have
that's the process.
If you have additional comments that you wanted to make or think about later, Richard's your person. Send them his way.
Me or Allie.
All right. Well, I think that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.